Coming up tonight, we take flight, Juneau takes on the Caribbean, and we go back to the 70s. It's all coming up, so let's set sail. Welcome to day number 7 of the cruise view from on board the Ovation of the Seas. Today was Sunday, May 19th, 2019, and for our location, we had another port of call on this port-intensive itinerary, especially the current stretch we're in, with a visit to Juneau, Alaska. This morning we were scheduled to be docked by 7 a.m., and we began entering the harbor at about 6:30 a.m. Already in port was the Island Princess that had docked by 6:30 just ahead of us. We were tied off about 7 a.m. this morning. The call for our people to get off came much later, closer to about 8:30 a.m. I'm not sure if they're just holding off on excursions or if they really were delayed. It appeared, though, that things went fairly smooth this morning. Along with us in port then, throughout the morning, a few other ships arrived. Starting at 9 a.m., the Celebrity Millennium arrived, docking at the other end of the harbor, along with the Grand Princess at 1 p.m., who docked directly behind us. And then the MS Mazdam arrived at 1:30, choosing to tender in the bay since all the berths had been taken up by that point in time. So this was an incredibly busy Alaskan port day. Looked far more like a Caribbean port than an Alaskan port, with a total of 5 ships in port, overloading the port and needing to tender people in. And that is something I'm sure they're going to see a lot this year. Alaska has become the new hot spot. It seems like that's where all the new ships are heading. Everyone seems to be wanting to go to Alaska at the moment. So with a full set of ships in port, they all had to start leaving then. At first it was the Island Princess at 4 p.m. She left before anyone else and was also the first in, so it made sense. The Celebrity Millennium was then the next ship to depart, scheduled for the exact same time as us at 9 p.m. She made her way out at 9 p.m., causing us to be delayed a bit. We ultimately made our way out at 9:30. Since the MS Mazdam was tendering in the middle of the harbor and we were the farthest in ship, that messed up our departure a bit. Instead of being able to spin around and head out, we had to actually slowly move away from the pier and make a complete loop around the MS Mazdam on our way out. As for the weather, this morning we had a sunrise at 4:23 a.m. and tonight we had a sunset at 9:26 p.m. Couldn't see it with all the mountains around us on the port call. You really could just see that light coming over the top of the mountain, and even at 9 p.m. it was just a bit of light. You couldn't see the sun. It looked as if there was a sunset already when it was still about half an hour off at the time. Overall, it was an absolutely beautiful day. When we arrived, it was about 47 degrees out, but the high for today was all the way up at 65, and it was a beautiful warm day today out there. There was a mix of cloudy and clear skies for the most part. We did have a sprinkle come through at about 4 p.m. today. It just came across the port, dropped a little bit of rain, nothing major, nothing heavy, nothing that wet everything down, just a little bit of a drizzle that was more of a nuisance than anything else for the day. And didn't affect me too much. Moving on to our compass summary, it was once again a port day without a very busy compass to go over, but a lot of port activities to deal with. So for me, as I've been doing on each one of these, trying to see that arrival, woke up at 5:15 this morning, and for once, it was beautiful out. You could see everything. The mountains were towering ahead of us. It was an absolutely gorgeous morning to go out and watch our arrival, unlike several of the past days where we've had those very wet and cloudy conditions. This morning, it was absolutely dry and beautiful out there. So, as I mentioned, I got up at 5:15. We entered the harbor about 6:20 a.m. with the Island Princess right there. Just a beautiful sight to see that massive harbor there. And when you're entering it, you've got mountains on both sides. You've got, at low tide at the time, you've got these piers that are just out there over dirt and sand because the water has completely gone away at that point. So it is a really neat area to enter at any time of the day, but especially in low tide like we did. And it's just this big open port at the end of this long channel that we went down. And as I mentioned, the conditions were perfect. There was a bit of wind, nothing major. We were sailing, so you'd expect a little bit of wind, but it was overall a very pleasant morning to be out there watching that arrival. And right after we docked, the sun finally made its way over the tops of the mountains and shined down onto the ship, making it absolutely incredible and warm out there. It was a beautiful morning, and that is why, once again, I went out to the Windjammer back deck, had my breakfast out there, because it is just the perfect place, even in Alaska, to have a nice meal. Then shortly after breakfast, at about 10 a.m., I finally headed ashore. Took some time to walk around the downtown area, see some of the shops, look around at all that Juneau, the city itself, had to offer in the area of the port. Then got back onto the ship at about noon. And this pier that we have here, not sure how old it is. It certainly looks like a newer one. Looks the same as we saw in the last two ports. It is built to deal with those rising and falling tides, and that was very obvious today. It was a massively steep ramp when we arrived in the morning, and then there were times in the afternoon when we hit that high tide that it was barely even a ramp at all, because the pier itself just rose so much over the day. And of course, anytime I'm in a port and there are ships around, including ours, I took some time to photograph them and check out everybody that was in port at the time. So I got back on that ship at noon, as I mentioned, stayed on board till about 12:30, got everything ready because I did have an excursion today. It was the dog sledding on the Mendenhall glacier by helicopter excursion. So I got off at 12:30, had to head up to the excursion area in the port to meet with our group, and we had a scheduled meeting time at 1 p.m. for our 1:30 excursion. So once we met, we had to fill out some forms stating who we were, what our estimated weight was with all of our clothing and anything we were carrying with us. You were not allowed any bags, anything like that on the helicopters, so anything you needed, such as cameras, you had to have on your person and be able to carry the entire time you were on the excursion. Once all that paperwork was done, we then boarded a bus that took us off to the helipads to go join our helicopter. After a brief safety video demonstrating all the functionality of the helicopter and everything we needed to know, we then got some snow boots on over top of our shoes to help keep our feet dry and allow us to walk better through the snow and ice of the glacier up there. And then headed out to the actual helipad area, where we waited for helicopters to arrive and the previous set of people to get off so that we could then board our helicopter. Once on the helicopter, it took about 10 minutes to fly to the dog camp. When over top of the mountains, it certainly seemed like they took the more scenic route with some really neat angles as we shot right over the tops of those mountains, just barely making clearance over everything below us. It was an absolutely incredible and beautiful sight to see all those mountains, the city of Juneau below, the glacier itself, and just everything that nature has to offer up in those mountains. Because up to this point, we've only seen them from a distance. We've seen them from the ship. They're off on the distant shores, but we've never actually gotten up close and personal to see what the land truly looks like when we're seeing these mountains on the horizon. So once we landed on the glacier, we then got off the helicopter, headed over to the dog camp, and learned some more safety information about how the camp works, what we should and should not do, and then got a little bit of an introductory tour of what the overall camp and the experience at the camp would be like. They had a Q&A where you could ask any questions and answered anything that people wanted to know about the dogs, the camp, the glacier, just everything in general of what was going on at that time. We also got to witness a few other groups going out and doing their dog sledding runs at that point, before our group was split up into groups of 4 to go ride the dog sleds. With each dog sled, there were 2 carts to it. All the dogs followed by 1 cart with 2 seats, and then the official driver would stand behind that one. followed by a second smaller car detacher that included one seat and another driver position. So we were able to rotate through those positions on board the sled, including getting to stand in the back of the sled to drive it from the rear. But the most incredible sight was that front seat with the dogs just running right ahead of you, and seeing how capable those dogs are and how much power they truly have as they're running. Along the way, we made 3 different stops to change out those positions, and we got to interact with the dogs, meet each one of them individually, and pet them, play with them, and get to know them a little bit better. All the dogs up there just look so wild and out of control. They're barking, they're excited, they're jumping around, but as soon as you go up to try to pet them, they just become these tiny little puppies that just want to get loved by you and turn into these nice little dogs that you'd find in your house, compared to the energetic, wild, athletic dogs that they really are. Once we were done with our full run through the route of the dog sled, we made our way back to the camp, where we got to meet a puppy who was off on his own, being trained to become a future dog sled dog to participate in the future. But for now, he is a puppy for the guests to meet and interact with more closely and hold and carry, compared to the official dog sled dogs that are a little more wild and larger and not as friendly to be held or picked up in the same manner. After a little more free time to just look over the glacier, get more pictures, ask more questions, our helicopters made their return to pick us up. The return ride was once again about 10 minutes. Went over the mountains, swooped down through the glacier area. Absolutely breathtaking sight, and especially at the end. When we went up at the beginning, it didn't look like too much. You could certainly tell we're going high, but at the end, when we got done and we just shot over that last mountain peak and came all the way back down to sea level, it was a truly incredible experience to drop so far down, and just the G-forces as it made its steep barrel turns and made its way back to the helipad to let us off. Once back there, we then waited for a bus to return to take us back to the pier. That was about a 15-minute bus ride back again, and we got to the ship roughly 4 o'clock, just in time for that Island Princess departure, and to get back on the ship and prepare for our 5:15 p.m. dinner tonight. So tonight was another casual night. Day 7, we've had 1 formal night so far. It's looking very unlikely we're going to get those 3 formal nights during the sailing. I feel like we probably should have had a second one by now if we were going to have 3 of them. It's likely we'll have one last one, perhaps on day number 10, that first sea day back north, or perhaps day number 9 when we have an afternoon at sea. But it doesn't look like 3 of them are going to fit in the remaining days, and that is what the site said. It originally did say 3 for an 11-night sailing. There was a lot of question about that, since Alaskan sailings typically have 2, but they're also typically only a 7-night sailing, not 11 like this sailing. And tonight the dining room was pretty much empty. It was probably only about maybe 25% of capacity at most. Most people seem to still be off in Juneau at dinner time, or they ate in Juneau and chose to skip dinner in the main dining room. But either way, it was incredibly empty today in the main dining room, and we noticed a couple days ago that some items appeared to be repeating, and today several items on the menu were repeating from previous days. So for my starter, I got the baked potato soup, and that one is a basic potato and cheese soup with some cheese on top and some bacon. And the bacon on this chef has been incredible. So much flavor to it. They've had a couple dishes with bacon in it, and each one you've just got so much flavor out of that bacon compared to some of the other soups, so you barely even notice the bacon is in it. For my entree, I then went with the beef stroganoff. Another incredible dish, had it on several other sailings, and it was served over the pasta just like it was the last time rather than the rice. And it was, as I mentioned, an incredible dish, always a tasty one. The way that they include the pickles and the beets just adds so much extra flavor to it. So that is always a favorite of mine to get. And for dessert, I then went with one that I previously had in this sailing already, the traditional English trifle. And They had a chilled soup today, the chilled blueberry soup, but instead of having it for an appetizer, I chose to have it with my dessert in place of an ice cream on the side today. And that was another incredible chilled soup. Seems like they are repeating things, which is odd, but they also have an entire secret menu each day. Includes several Indian dishes along with some other items, and of course these chilled soups, but they are completely left off the menu. You need your waiter to inform you of them to know what these secondary items that are available are for the day. And that really adds so much more depth and size to these menus, and even though they repeat, you do have these secondary items that are added each day that give you some more options as well. So it's kind of interesting. It's a very different dinner operation than what we've seen on some of the other sailings. I don't know if it's just the way Ovation does it because of how their markets, if it's something Royal Caribbean's trying new, but it seems to be working. The only thing they could do is perhaps make those secondary dishes a little more pronounced so people are aware they are there. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to keep it as secret as it appears to be. Those first night or two, we didn't even know they existed up to then. Then after dinner, we had a bit of a break before our departure for tonight. To mention, it's scheduled for 9 p.m. It was delayed because the Celebrity Millennium left at 9 p.m. At about 9:30, we finally made our way out. We left the pier. Instead of being able to just spin around and head out, we did slowly bring the front of the ship out and then started progressing forward to basically drive around the perimeter of the harbor, leaving the MS Mazdam in the center and the Grand Princess still tied off on the side. Then headed to 270, where it was an entire night of 70s. Prior to this, they did have a 70s music game over in Music Hall, but the big events were all in 270, starting at 9:15 with a 70s Disco Inferno pre-party. Missed that because of the departure, but I made it for the end of the 9:45 70s song set with Royal Caribbean singers Abby and Duke, and that we've seen on several other ships where a pair of the Royal Caribbean production cast singers up on the stage, oftentimes in the Centrum. Here in this case it was in 270, forming 70s songs with the band or a background track. They had a background track today, and they also had the Impossible City Vistarama running throughout that time. So if you did want to attend and wanted to see our departure, you could not do that because they did have the windows blocked at the time for that 70s event to start. Following that, things just kept on rolling, went straight into the official 70s Disco Inferno party, hosted by the cruise director, Chris Brown, along with the activities manager, Angel, and that included the entirety of the cruise director staff. 270, they had that Impossible City Vistarama running the entire time. They had a 70s Disco Inferno logo up on the robo screens, and then changed it to rotating live shots of the audience during the event. Compared to some of the others, it was a little bit more toned down. It was much better than Groovy Town. It was back to the original, back to the one that made it special. Had all the style, the excitement, the activity of those Centrum ones and those Royal Promenade ones, but hosted in 270 where things are a little more intimate, close together. You don't have the cruise director staff up on large platforms out in the distance. They are right in the stage, right next to the people that are down there dancing for the party. But with how high-tech 270 is, they had that Vistarama going, but it wasn't really transitioning from night to day. It was just staying at nighttime, so it was a little bit toned down compared to normal. And they had the huge lighting system, but they didn't use it quite as extensively as they probably could. They did use it pretty thoroughly, though. They at least didn't ignore it as we've seen in some parties they've done. Overall, for such a beautiful venue, it worked incredible. Looked like everybody had a lot of fun. The only thing they could have done was perhaps utilize that Vistarama much better. A custom-made 70s Vistarama probably would have done a much better job of tying it all together and changing the ambience with each song than what that standard static Impossible City was doing. So that lasted 10 to 10:45. Then at 10:45, it was the 70s Disco Inferno after party. And with that, the DJ got up on the stage and started playing his own music. And oddly, the Vistoramas went away at that time. The robo screens changed to the music levels that we've seen in the silent discos, but the Vistoramas went completely away. Those screens went up and they changed it from the Vistorama to just multicolored lights. And that created an incredible effect in the room as those lights were shining. Even without the screens down, the physical structure of those windows in 270 provides so much surface for those lights to shine off of and creates a really neat effect on the area. By that time, we were kind of on our way, so you couldn't see too much out the windows, but at least they were open again. I then went outside where it was absolutely perfect conditions tonight. It was 50 degrees, calm breeze, and beautiful out. Off the port aft, a bright orange moon was rising over the mountains, while on the starboard forward, the sunshine was still coming over the tops of the mountains because on both sides of the ships you had snow-capped mountains just right there. So it's an absolutely beautiful sight out there tonight, even at 11:30 p.m. when it was still light out. So that does it for our conference and about does it for this episode. That is the end of today. Tomorrow we are in Skagway from 7 a.m. to 8:30 p.m., our final official docking protocol of the sailing, so be sure to tune in for that. For now, I am Derek Cohn. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for the links.